Do you struggle with finding the daily bias? If the answer is yes, keep watching this video. Most YouTube videos you watch will usually say something along the lines of, look at the last daily candle, mark the high and low, whatever BS they're saying. And to be honest, I did not find that helpful. So I have a few different ways in identifying daily bias, but I have one main way that helps me a lot. So the first thing I do is I actually go to the daily chart and I look for any obvious fair value gaps. And in this mess right here, there wasn't really any obvious ones besides this one, which we could use as a bias, and I'll explain why later. But this was a time where I didn't really use a daily chart because I felt like the daily was choppy. In order for this first method to work, you have to make sure that the daily chart has a decent amount of fair value gaps or an obvious fair value gap, something along the lines of that, because that's how you're going to find the best plays and use the easiest bias. So starting off, right now the daily has a fair value gap. So my bias is bullish until this is broken. Now, being that we're at all-time highs, this is a very interesting scenario because, I always say long at all-time highs until it stops working. But how would we know if the daily bias is bearish here? Well, we know that the daily bias would be bearish if we got a daily candle close under this fair value gap. So I kind of use inversions to find a bias in fair value gaps. So because we're holding this fair value gap right now, I can't say the bias is bearish. I can't, because it's not bearish here. We're clearly holding this gap. The only way I'd be able to say the bias is bearish is if we close under that. Now, let's say this fair value gap was not here. Okay, so let's just say this didn't exist. What I would do in that situation is I actually wouldn't use the daily chart. A lot of people think you have to use the daily chart for daily bias. What I would do in that situation is I'd go down to the 1 or 4 hour time frame. So I'd probably go to the 4 hour and I'd see if we had a fair value gap there. And sure enough, we have a very obvious fair value gap right here. And to me, this is one I definitely would use because it's just obvious. So if the daily didn't have one, I'd use this and I'd be like, okay, right now I'm going to be bullish because this has not broken. Okay, I can't say, you have to ask yourself, like, can you say the bias is bearish in this situation? And the answer is obviously no. You just can't say the bias is bearish here. I mean, you can guess that we might get a short setup maybe off this high or whatever, but the daily bias itself, you clearly cannot say is bearish. Okay, the only way you could say this bias is bearish here is if we get a close under this fair value gap. Okay, so that is an important aspect to finding the daily bias. So just to recap, again, what I do is I start with the daily chart. Okay, I see if there's an obvious fair value gap, and right now there is, so I'll probably use this one. And if there is no gap, I go to the 4 hour or the 1 hour until I find an obvious gap we could use. This morning, I actually based my daily bias off of this hourly. So in my Discord, okay, I basically said the daily bias will now depend on this hourly for the day. So you can see this is the hourly. I said daily bias will depend on this, meaning if we held above it and the bodies held it, I would be bullish. Okay, and what actually happened is we wicked down under it, as you can see right here, and then the body last second ended up closing above before the candle closed. So that kind of hinted to me that the bias was going to be bullish today because, one, the body held, and then if we go to the 5-minute time frame, you got it kind of an iFVG back to the upside. So because of that, it was really hard to be bearish in that situation. As you all know, I only use inverse fair value gaps. And recently, I made a full free PDF of inverse fair value gap rating setups that I use to rate my own setups A through C. So if you want to check that out, just click the first link in the description. It's completely free and hopefully should help you. Again, I start with the daily bias, the daily chart. I look at the fair value gap here to see if there's an obvious one. Right now there is, but like I said, if there wasn't, I'd go to the 1 hour or 4 hour. Okay, and then based off the 1 hour, 4 hour, I'd kind of just gauge on how the lower time frame price is reacting to those zones. Like this morning, when we were inside this hourly, I went to the 1 minute time frame in this spot just to kind of see how price would react. And that's what helped me for the daily bias. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure to use code DODGY for Apex Prop Firm account. Very, very helpful, better than demo accounts, and very, very cheap right now. There's a big sale, link in the description for that. So daily bias is actually not as simple as you think. You're going to go off this video and be like, oh, now I know how to find the daily bias. There will be some days where we won't have an obvious fair value gap on the hourly, 4 hour, or daily to base your bias off of. Okay, some days are going to like this is not going to exist, and we're just kind of going to be in the middle of nowhere. And that's usually when I go to the 15-minute and then the 5-minute, and I kind of look at 5-minute and 15-minute fair value gaps. It just depends. So that is the biggest thing that's kind of helped me daily bias. And it's not using the highs and lows of the previous day. It's just looking at old fair value gaps in the hourly, the daily, the 4-hour, and just kind of seeing how we're reacting to them on the lower time frame. That's definitely been the biggest help. Another thing I'll do sometimes, which this is very rare, if I do see trend line liquidity, which you can kind of see forming here, or equal highs or equal lows, I will be bullish or bearish to wherever they are. Now, right now, this is a weird scenario. This is bullish, but we also have trendline liquidity to the downside. So I'm actually going to wait for CPI tomorrow to see if this is taken out. But let's say we get CPI tomorrow and then we take out all this. I would definitely be looking for longs here because I know it's a fair value gap and I know we're at all-time highs. And again, I would just be watching the reaction here from the lower time frame. A lot of people think you need to know the daily bias when you hit this low. And the truth is you don't need to. Just play what you see. Right, this morning, I kind of played what I saw. I kind of saw a V-shaped recovery here that inverted a fair value gap. So I figured that the daily bias would be bullish. And sure enough, I was right. And you can actually see right now, this is a live example of, I'm guessing the market will go up after this 5-minute inverses. So I know this video isn't some magical secret enigma. Here's how to find the daily bias every day. And the only words of advice I'll give you is you will not have a daily bias every day. Some days you'll just have to play what you see. Some days there will be easy kind of gaps to base your bias off of, like today was. You know, like this was pretty clean too. And other days where you're just going to go in the market and you're going to have to deal with something like this, right? Where you're not going to necessarily have a daily bias all day because we're just kind of chopping around and you want to use the lower time frame and just scalp to little highs and lows. Here's one more example where I didn't really have a daily bias because it was too messy. There wasn't any obvious fair value gaps and I didn't really know what to do here. So what I did is I just went on the hourly and 4-hour time frame and I just kind of played price from there. Now, in this situation here, I didn't have a daily bias here. But we end up inversing this fair value gap a few days later, meaning because of this daily inverse, I turned out being bullish. And you can kind of see it created a new fair value gap here. And this fair value gap ended up holding and then going back to all-time highs. So I'll use daily inversions and daily fair value gaps, kind of watch the reaction from them. Daily inversions are also good, but we don't get them very much. You can kind of see we do get one here, which told me that the bias is going to be bearish because we violated this fair value gap. And other than that, we really haven't gotten too many. We got one here, obviously, which was super nice, which ended up holding a support. But, you know, the daily chart doesn't give you a lot of opportunities in a month. It usually gives you maybe 2 to 3 good opportunities in 1 month. That's why I use the 1-hour and 4-hour mainly for daily bias. But if there is an opportunity in the daily, I would definitely suggest using it. That is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm not trying to trick you guys and make you think like you can find the daily bias every day, because that's one thing that I was totally wrong about when I first started learning ICT. I thought you had to know the daily bias every day, but sometimes I just watch momentum and the reactions based off of certain areas. And the thing that I start with is the obvious fair value gap on the 4-hour, 1-hour, or daily chart. That is it for this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.